Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Luca, and I like to talk about books. Today, oh hello, this is Winona. She doesn't like books, she likes to eat them. Today, a long-awaited video for me is reading all of the books that Isaac reads in Heartstopper Season 2. So, Season 2 came out 12 days ago, and I have read, well, I've read 15 books. He reads 16 books in the series that I was able to identify. I read 14 of those books, and then I read another one that seemed particularly on brand. So I'm going to talk about those 15 books that I read, and, you know, how they relate to Isaac, and gush a little bit about how much I love Isaac, because Isaac is like, I just love Isaac. I love Isaac. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, these are the books that Isaac reads in Heartstopper Season 2. Welcome to the video. I will start by saying that, I did basically woke up, watched the series, and every single time Isaac had a book, excuse me, ma'am, every single time Isaac had a book, I paused and I figured out what the book was. My initial watch, there were only 2 books that I missed. And one I'm a little unsure about, but given the content, I think it's the right one. But there were 2 books that I missed. And then I rewatched it with my friend Maja, who you may know from Book Haul with my ex. But Maja and I rewatched the series, and she helped me figure out what those last 2 books were. So, huge shout out to Maja. Winona needs to chill. She's as excited as I am, as you can tell. This is my own list, and I don't know if, of course, if any of these books are canon. Of course, some of them are, because you can just see them. But, you know, some of the ones I'm guessing at. But I think it's pretty accurate, given everything involved. I'm not sure. I don't know. Thanks, Maja, for helping me figure out what books they are. Let's get to the books. I'm just gonna go in order of episode. So in episode 1, we'll start off. We read I Love This Part by Tillie Walden. Tillie Walden is a cartoonist from Austin, Texas, I believe. So Tillie Walden wrote a graphic memoir called Spinning about like ice skating and being gay. So it fits. Basically, I Love This Part is about 2 young girls in school who are in love. And it's just a series of short like vignettes almost of moments they spend together, and how being in love and how loving each other makes them feel like they are bigger in the world. As you can kind of tell from the cover illustration, like they're sitting on top of the buildings. They feel with this love that they are bigger. I love Tillie Walden. Tillie Walden just makes me feel so much. And it's really, her work is so simple and amazing, and it just is crazy how much she can make me feel with such like I see a picture of a field and I've got emotion. And how does she do that? That is so cool. It makes me just, wow. Winona agrees with me, okay? And Winona agrees. God, you just feel so much, and it's just about love. And there's an underlying current of not feeling like this sort of love is okay or acceptable. It just reminds me of all the characters. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're all so gay and happy and also complex and sad. And so this just is complex and sad, but also happy. They have the happy moments, and then they have the moments that are heavy and sad and lonely. And I Love This Part by Tillie Walden. Amazing. Really cute. Would check it out. It's super short. And I don't even know if it exists in paperback, but it just, wow. The next book that Isaac reads in episode 1, Ace of Spades. This one, complete change of tone from I Love This Part. Absolutely incredibly different. Holy cow. This is a YA mystery thriller, I guess. It's not a romance. Anyway, so yeah, like YA mystery thriller. It follows 2 Black students at an elite, it's not a boarding school, but an elite private school in America somewhere. An elite private school that is white, except for these 2 students, Devin and Chiamaka. It kind of starts at the beginning of the year. Devin is elected to be one of the head prefects, senior prefects, and Chiamaka is the head prefect. And Devin's like, why? Like, he just wants to make music, go to Juilliard, fly under the radar. No one really knows him. He doesn't know anyone. And Chiamaka is like this perfect. She has worked so hard to be the most perfect version of herself for the public eyes. She's like the most popular girl. She's worked so hard for this. So she's like, yes, I deserve senior head prefect or whatever. And Devin is like, okay. Thanks. And then things kind of start going crazy, and an anonymous messenger named Aces, who signs off as Aces, starts spilling nasty little secrets. And Devin and Chiamaka get wrapped up in this mystery and intrigue, and it becomes really loaded and dangerous and very heavily racist, and it is so... I was on the edge of my seat. You know what I mean? Lies, intrigue, high school backstabbing. We're in high school, but the stakes feel so high, you know? There's love, like a lot of betrayal. I will say, at first, so I've seen this book around a lot, and I was like, I'm not that interested in this book. Whatever. It's like, people are really into it, but it's YA, and it's not... I read YA, queer YA romances, okay? That's just what I read. When I read YA, which I don't do that often. But I was like, I'm gonna do it for the video, of course. And at first I was like, ugh, okay, I'm not gonna like this, and it's like 450 pages of meh. And then I was like, okay, like, I want to be reading this right now, constantly. I devoured it. I will say, it's a little similar to Solitaire. If you've read Solitaire by Alice Oseman, it's a little similar with the idea of this, like, anonymous messenger, and then the, spoilers, actually, never mind. But, like, there's a similar arc, and I'm not gonna, spoil it, but it's also very different. And it's not about love, but it is queer, so that also just, like, made me happy, because, like, overall, I enjoyed this. Thanks, Isaac. Not necessarily a book that, like, reminds me of anyone in any stories, especially because, like, there's actually great racial diversity in Alice Oseman's work. So, like, I wasn't thinking, wow, this is really representative of characters, but it was really good. It reminded me a little bit, Chiamaka reminded me a little bit of Frances, just because of how, like, they're like, I need to be perfect head girl, and then they're like, maybe this isn't everything I want. That was Ace of Spades. Really good. Episode 2, moving on to episode 2. One of the first books that we see Isaac with, parent-teacher conferences. He's like, I'd like to see Isaac participate a little bit more, and Isaac's just sitting there reading a book, and I was like, preach. The book he's reading is We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. This is it's like YA, but it doesn't feel YA. It's not a romance, but there are themes of love. It follows Marin. She's in her first year at university, and it's summer break. 2 weeks before she was gonna leave for school, and she lives in California, and she's in New York. So right before she was gonna cross the country to go to school, her grandfather died. She ran away to school, essentially, and has been living in a bubble of grief since. And one of the things that she left behind in California was her friend Mabel. So Mabel is coming to New York to stay with Marin in the dorm for like 3 days. And Mabel and Marin had an incredibly close relationship in California, and Marin has basically not talked to Mabel since California, and it's been, 3 months? So it's really, this book is about loneliness and grief and love and like finding people who pull you out of your grief and your loneliness, and the people who can be there for you. Yeah, there was a lot. I was not expecting kind of the twist at the end. I liked it the whole way through. I will say, it's not a happy book. It did not make me go, wow, this makes me so happy. It made me go, wow, I am so sad and heartbroken. But I do think that it felt real, that because of how there are moments in life where you feel this hopeless and empty and lonely, and I felt like that, it felt really real to me. And in the end, I don't think it felt hopeless. I don't think the message, I think the message got across that there will be people there for you. I really loved it, actually. It was really good. Also, it's cool cover art, so, be like Isaac, read cool books. The second book that he reads in episode 2 it's a Penguin Black Spine classic, and he reads it, and they're in, like, the corner mart buying snacks. And I went to the Penguin Black Spine website, and I looked at all the covers, and the one that looked the closest to me was The Importance of Being Earnest and Other Plays by Oscar Wilde. I had The Importance of Being Earnest. I do not have the other plays, but I figured, hey, you know what? That's okay. I'll just read the one play. If you're gonna yell at me, that's sorry. So I read The Importance of Being Earnest and Other Plays by Oscar Wilde. This made sense to me as, like, a choice, because I couldn't exactly tell, right? Like, I didn't know exactly if this was right, but it made sense to me because Oscar Wilde is, like, famous for being queer. He was in jail for being gay. It made sense to me. Well, I guess it was originally a 4-act play, and then they were like, that's too long, and Oscar Wilde was like, okay, and he made it a 3-act play. But, I mean, it's about love, but essentially it's about 2 men, so Jack and Algernon, both pretend to be Earnest, as in a man named Earnest, to win the hearts of women. And of course, trouble arises. You can't pretend to be somebody else to win someone's heart. And it becomes complicated, and it's funny, and it's witty, and it's just like it's just a fun play. And actually, I think it would be really fun to see performed live. I would like to see it performed live. It's, it has a lot of acclaim if you'd like. It's very fun, and I think, as with a lot of these classics, that I'm probably missing something. And I might be at the point in my education career, I'm doing an English degree. I feel like maybe at this point in my life, I'm not actually missing anything. I'm just so unsure of myself that like I get it and I'm like, nah, I don't get it. So I don't actually know if I got it. I thought it was quite fun. It's just a fun little romance, witty, short. Would be really fun to see performed, or to perform, to be honest. And that was the importance of being earnest. So in then episode 3, we have one book that Isaac like reads, and then we also have the pride display that he sets up with James in the library. And I just wanted to talk about, like, I did figure out, I think, what all the books are, so I will say what those are. I've only read, like, one of them, literally. So the one I have read is I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver, which follows a genderqueer teenager getting kicked out of their house and then the ensuing results. That one's really, that I've read twice now. It makes me, like, so would recommend. They also have Beyond the Gender Binary, which I think is in, like, an info book. They have George, also known as Melissa, which is, like, young middle grade book. All Boys Aren't Blue, which I think is a YA novel. Bi, about being bisexual, and then Ace, about being asexual. The Kingdom of Sand by Andrew Holleran, I believe is his name, which I am going to read, but I was like, it's too much to read that for this. I'm already reading 15 books, I'm not gonna read more. And then My Magic Family, which I think is a kid's book. 100 Queer Poems, which is a poem anthology. My Shadow is Pink, which is another kid's book. And then When You Call My Name, which I think is a YA book. So those are the books on the Pride display. I didn't read any of them, but they're out there. They're there for your viewing pleasure, reading pleasure. The other book that he does read during episode 3 is, I think it's at the Paris meeting, and Tara's like, oh, what book are you reading? And he goes, oh, it's Book Lovers. And I was like, thank you for telling us. People are obviously gonna want to read all the books that Isaac reads, and sometimes it's not easy to know what he's reading. So anyway, but the book he was reading was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Which, like, of course it was Book Lovers, because Isaac is a book lover. This is a romance. I mean, you could get down to the nitty-gritty and say that Emily Henry is, like, a literary writer with romantic themes, which is what I would do. I don't think she writes, like, romance. Like, this is not Nora Roberts. This is not, I don't actually know if Nora Roberts is a writer. You know what I mean? It's not the mass paperback naked man on the front. It leans more literary, but Book Lovers. Let's talk about it. I did actually read this earlier this year, but I read it again because Isaac. Duh. So it follows Nora Stevens. She's an agent. She's a book agent in New York. She's a type A, very anal, likes things to be listed, and she, like, hates cliches. She basically knows she is a cliche. She's the woman that the male lead of a romance novel leaves for the fun country-loving woman. So she acknowledges this, and she basically thinks she's doomed and will never have a true romance because she's the cliche that everyone leaves. And then she meets Charlie Lastra. He's an editor, and he is mean. People do not like him, and she doesn't like him. And she's like, ugh, whatever. They're talking about this new book. He says, no, I don't want it. And Nora says, okay. They don't talk again for 2 years. Cut to 2 years later, and Nora's little sister Libby is like, come to Sunshine Falls with me. We're North Carolina. We're going from New York to North Carolina. You're gonna see this idyllic town that the book that Charlie Lastra 2 years ago said was awful, that your client published, got a movie. We're gonna go. We're gonna see what's going on in this town. And Nora's like, what? No, we're not. And Libby says, come on, big sis, for me. So they do. They go to Sunshine Falls. Who's in Sunshine Falls but Charlie Lastra? Weird. Thus starts Nora's, like, journey to start checking off this checklist of items that Libby has told her to do in Sunshine Falls. And she keeps bumping into Charlie Lastra. She keeps having to be faced with her childhood trauma from the death of her mom. Overall, I mean, it's a cute romance. It's a really good romance, in my opinion. It's straight, but that's okay. I'll settle. But it's also, like, character-driven, and they have amazing banter. Just want to say. Amazing banter. It's also pretty easy to read, easy to follow, but clever and witty and fun and smart. And it's just, like, a good, fun romance, and I liked it. Thanks, Isaac, for making me read it again. I'll probably read it again in the future, but it was good. I think this one's more for, like, the James and the Isaacs out there than it is for, like, the rest of the cast of Heartstopper, but it was really cute. Then we go to Paris, and of course, when we're in Paris, we basically read only French books. The first book is a tome. It is huge, and it's Les Mis. Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. I will say, Isaac reads this on the bus to France from England. Excuse me, no. I'm not reading this. Like, I got about halfway through, as you might be able to tell, 5 years ago, and I started it, and I was like, oh cool, he reads Les Mis. That's gonna be a great opportunity for me to try reading Les Mis again. I listened to the first like 4 chapters and I was like, yeah, I'll read it one day. One day I will. I swear, I will read it one day. I'm not reading it for this video. I honestly watch the musical or read the play, read the musical. I don't know. It's long and not, so far, I know one guy and it's not someone that actually matters to the story. To my recollection of the story. It's like, he's a priest. Great. I think they included this for Frenchness. If you're interested, I love Victor Hugo. Hunchback of Notre Dame is one of my favorite books, but I'm okay not reading this 1,200-page monstrosity for a video, so thanks. I admire that Isaac supposedly is able to read this in one go. And I can't imagine that's a very long bus ride, but I don't know. I guess I'm thinking like 5 hours max. I wouldn't be able to read this in 5 hours. He reads that. And then we get to like books that I actually can read. One of those is, of course, famous French classic, Le Petit Prince. I mean, he probably reads it in English, and I decided I would read it in French because I'd spent so long. And I did, and it was great. This is such a, I mean, it's a kid's book, but it's just so, it's basically saying adults are crazy, which is so true. Adults are crazy, and if you can keep your childhood sense of wonder and openness and adventure, you're gonna be set for life, or a lot better prepared than a lot of the adults in the world. Essentially, it's about it's an autobiographical. The author meets, he's stranded in the desert, in the Sahara Desert, and he meets this kid, basically, and the kid says, draw me a sheep, and as they, over their time talking, as the author starts to, ask questions of where the little prince has been. The little prince tells him about his journey away from his asteroid, just the people he met along the way, and also a little bit about his asteroid, like the flower that he keeps there, and his volcanoes, and how you can't have baobabs on a planet as small as his because they would completely destroy the planet. So it's a little bit about loneliness. I think that's one of the themes that we talk about a lot in this selection of books is loneliness. Yes, so Little Prince, it ends up just making me really happy. And it's like every adventure Little Prince ends and he goes, adults are weird. And it's like, yeah, they are. And it has just fun, cute little illustrations. I just really like this book, and it's not very long, and especially if you're reading it in a language that suited you better, it would take, half an hour. Fun little story. Classic. That was a good one. Another book that he reads in episode 4 is, and this one I actually paused at a perfect moment and I got the title. It was like, oh man, the title was like perfect. That's The Awakening by Kate Chopin. Also, side note, you might notice a lot of these books are not the same as what Isaac reads edition-wise. I don't live in the UK. Some of them are classics, but they are the same books, I swear. So The Awakening by Kate Chopin. This one feels a little bit more out of the, first of all, it's not set in France, and for all of the episodes where they're in Paris, he mostly reads books that are French, except for this one and one other. This one is set in New Orleans and on the Grand Isle, so there's Creole influences, so there are some like French sentences, but it's not like written in French like Les Mis or Le Petit Prince. So, that was an interesting choice to me, but also it's a great book, so, This follows Edna Pontellier. She has 2 kids. She's been married for like 6 years. She's 28, and she's spending the summer in the Grand Isle, which I guess is on the coast, the Gulf Coast of Louisiana. And she meets a young man. She falls in love with him, but she's married, so nothing happens, and it's fine. She goes back to New Orleans, and she meets another young man, and it's just like basically her time falling in love, basically for the first time, and getting really depressed. So it's about depression and loneliness and the environment of, it feels a lot to me like those old Russian novels where everything is about environment. Felt a little bit like that, like it's about society. There we go, that's the word. It's about society. It's fun, and I get quite swept up in it. Female depression and agency. Not agency necessarily, but independence. Given that it was written in 1899, probably shocking for its time. And it in fact says on the back of the book, was so shocking to turn-of-the-century readers that it was neglected for decades. I'd recommend. It's fun. Fun is just not the right word, but I have a good time reading it because I like to see all the echelons of New Orleans society. Hi. Oh, feisty. Okay. Speak about female agency. Isaac reads this too. We only get one book in episode 5, so it's kind of like episode 3, except in episode 3 we got that whole display. Anyway, so episode 5 we only have one book, which is The Outsider by Albert Camus. Camus is an Algerian philosopher, novelist, writer guy. Oh God, I think if anyone I knew in real life heard me saying this stuff, they'd be like, wow, you're not as smart as I thought you were, which I'm not as smart as you think I am. The Outsider, it's like very, very popular in like lower level French classes for people to read L'Étranger. People read it a lot, but it's pretty popular. But anyway, The Outsider also publishes The Stranger because it's L'Étranger in French. It follows Marceau. He's an apathetic, quiet, and views life in a way kind of like nothing really matters, which is one of like Camus' biggest things, I think. I personally, from the reading that I get, is that like life happens. His characters sort of let life happen to them and don't seem to take as active a role. Maybe that's sort of how I interpret this one. But basically, on page 1, Rousseau is like, Mom died, and he doesn't know whether it was, like, he's like, I don't know if it was yesterday, I don't know if it was today, I just got the note. So he goes to see his mother, and then after seeing his mother, he goes right back to work. Later in the book, he gets swept up in this trial. He's just so kind of blasé about the whole thing. And there's the woman who, like, is in love with him and wants to marry him, and he's just like, yeah, okay. And that's sort of how he approaches life. Yeah, okay, sure, I'll do it. But it's basically viewing this trial and experiences from the viewpoint of such apathy. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of things you're supposed to say about The Outsider that I just don't. It just doesn't. I just don't. I feel a little bad. This was supposed to be 25 pence. Which it certainly wasn't. It was $5. 25 pence. Imagine if you could buy a book for 25 pence. Like a new one. Okay, anyway, sorry, I'm not gonna talk about the prices of books anymore. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm missing a lot, but it's just about Marceau, apathetic, laid back, has a routine. His routine gets disrupted by this trial, and he's kind of like, oh, okay, all right. I don't know. It's a good book, though. Like, I have a hard time talking about Camus, but I do think it's worthwhile to read him. I've read, not quite a few, I've read 3 of his novels, and I like them all. I don't know. Episode 6, more than halfway through. Ready for this? Yes. Tara's birthday, and what does Isaac read but Birthday by Meredith Russo. Now, I, first of all, had a really hard time finding this one. Thank you. This is one of the ones that Maja helped me figure out. Thank you, Maja. And then I was like, this is gonna be bad because it looks like a cis-het teenage romance. And I just like, the cover, the US cover made me so not interested that I was almost like, I'm just not gonna read it. And then I was like, no, I have to read it. I owe it to Isaac. I'm going to read it. And then I was like, I am so glad I read this. Let me just tell you. So they don't say this on the back of the book, but I think it's clear in the first chapter, and I think it made me, once I figured this out about the book, I was like, oh my God, I want to read this. It's one of the main characters is just trans. And I was like, duh, like, oh my God. And then you get a lot of her transness, and it's just, oh my gosh. So anyway, it follows Morgan and Eric, and they were born on the same day, and they've been best friends since the day they were born, basically. It starts at 13 and it goes up until 18. So there's like 5 parts, and basically it's told only on their birthdays, on the days that they share together, and basically how they like need to have this day together. But it changes as they grow older and they grow apart and they grow together, and it's just like really interesting seeing that progression over the years. And the tagline is a romance 18 years in the making. Really interesting because Morgan is like, I'm into guys but I'm not gay, and Eric is like, I'm into girls, but I'm also into Morgan. And then, you know, they figure it out, but it's about this self-discovery. I mean, okay, I don't know. There's just it was a really quick read for me, but it was also kind of heavy hitting because of how much they talk about the trans stuff. Brother, wow. Okay, wow. But the fact that like this change takes root at 13 and like over time, I don't know, it was just amazing. And it's about family and love. I mean, it really is about love, but ow, don't do that anyway. It's really good. I really liked it. I really enjoyed it, even though I didn't think I was going to, but I did because of the trans aspect. So I think that is important to know, honestly. And it doesn't feel like a spoiler because you begin to feel it page like 2. Amazing. I would highly recommend Birthday, even though I gotta be honest, I don't like what sort of title is Birthday, and the cover, the American cover with the 2 faces. I was just like, this feels like a YA dystopia thing, and I don't want to read it. Anyway, I really liked it. Would highly recommend. Thank you, Maja, for helping me figure out what book that was, because I would have just given up. And it was amazing. So the next book, also incredibly hard to see. This is just, we get like 2 glimpses of it. And they're all blurry because it's just like they're walking around Paris and he's got a book, he's holding a book because of course he is, he's Isaac. But he's reading Around the World in 80 Days. And now I will say, so we paused and we were like, what? Like, it looks like there's a big like bow, B-O on the cover. And I was like, what? I was like, bow, like, I don't see bow. It wasn't like bow something. It was just bow. And then I was like, what if it's 80? And then I looked up 80. And then I was like, of course, they're in France. It's Around the World in 80 Days. And then because Goodreads, which is like kind of what I use to do my cover sleuthing, Goodreads, of course, shows like one cover. So I went to the covers, like all the list of applications, and I found the edition. And I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. So it makes sense because they're in France. They're in Paris. Jules Verne is a French writer. So I thought that was great. Around the World in 80 Days. Actually, it's about a British guy. You know, interesting, whatever. But it's about Phileas Fogg. And he basically makes a bet with his fancy friends at the Reform Club in London that he can travel around the world in 80 days or less. And he goes out and he takes his very new butler, as in hired the day he makes this bet, Passepartout. And they just travel across the world together, around the world, I guess. And they aim to do it in under 80 days. They do not take in the sights. They just go. There's a Detective Fix, who's like, Mr. Fogg is actually a bank robber and I need to find him. The three of them, and then it becomes four of them because when they're in India, they rescue this woman from being burned alive. So there are four of them just traveling around the world. At first, basically, there are like people who like don't want to do it in 80 days. Mr. Fix is like trying to get them to stop. And then Mr. Fix is like, I need them to do it in 80 days. So he's back in London. So it's like, they're trying, I mean, it's really focused on this like 80 day. Like we need to get back by 80 days because Phileas Fogg has bet like 22,000 pounds, which it would be a lot for whenever this was written in, you know, like the 1800s, like late 1800s. First published 1873. Yeah, there you go. Okay, 20,000 pounds. For me, it's still a lot of money. Maybe not like as much as it was, but that's a lot of money. And so he basically is betting that, and he needs to get back in 80 days. So my dad said that what would have been a big deal is, because I was like, this is kind of boring. Like, it's an adventure novel, kind of, except it's not like he's faced with actual terror. It's more just like, oh my gosh, we missed the boat. So I was a little like, okay, great, you missed the boat. And my dad was like, well, one thing that was really, what would have shocked readers back then is the fact that this British guy takes on this Indian girl and carries her around the world with him. And, like, that's kind of more, oh, Winona, you could not use your Crunchy channel, and that would be really great. You know, I guess it has, like, more, it would have maybe had more value back then. Also, of course, we can get around the world less than 80 days these days because we have planes, but, you know, they're not using planes. So it was, like, it was a fun adventure novel. I don't know. And you know, the ending, I was a little bit like, oh, and then the ending, and then I was like, oh, I don't have a better way to describe it without, like, spoiling it, so, you know. And then the last book, and I won't tell you what scene this is from because it's a very important, pivotal scene. And it makes me cry. This scene, if you know what scene I'm talking about, the birthday party, man, I relate so hard to Isaac in this moment, incredibly hard to Isaac. I would cry, so I'm just not gonna talk about it, but he's reading a poetry collection called Crush by Richard Sykin. Basically, it's really short. It's a poetry collection, but the poems all sort of focus on queerness, being gay. What I wrote here is that it's sad and feels familiar and lonely and full of love and full of unrequited love, not feeling that love in return, and very thematic. Good choice. I always feel with poetry that I'm just not getting something. So, you know, I read it and I did feel stuff about the poems. I think one of my favorite poems, A Primer for the Small Weird Loves, is probably one of my favorite poems. But it's just gay and loving, and it was sad, but emotional, and it made me feel, and I think that's what poetry is supposed to do. So overall, it was really good. It made sense with, you know, the moments in the show. So I would recommend it if you're into poetry. I feel like, as always, I'm just gonna say it because I just, like, you know, really have very little, like, self-confidence. I'm really trash at talking about books. I love reading, but I don't feel like I'm good at talking about books. But I thought, maybe you want to know what the books are that Isaac reads and what they're about. So I hope that this is anything. If it's not, I'm really sorry. Anyway. Okay, so we're back from Paris. Okay, we're in episode 7. We're back in wherever they are. Kent. It's not Kent. I want to say Kent. I feel like it's not Kent. I don't know. Back in the UK. Prom is happening, right? Spoiler, but not really. So prom is happening. You know, Sahar and Tara are freaking out, and there's like a scene where he's like checking his phone. He's reading Boy Erased. This is the only glimpse of this book, but he's reading it. So, Boy Erased by Gerard Conley. This is, you may have like heard this, Troye Sivan was in the movie, which is like, okay, I need to see the movie. I started it and then I was like, nah, I don't want to watch this. And then as I was reading the book, the first like 15 minutes of the movie, I was like, oh, it's really, I'm going to watch the movie now because Troye Sivan, and also now that I know like the book, I think I'm going to watch the movie. But anyway, blah, blah, blah. Basically, it's told in sort of two ways. The 2 weeks that he spends at Love and Action, which is, I guess, an ex-gay. Like, it's not a clinic. It's an ex-gay organization, right? With the sole purpose of saying your gay thoughts are wrong and we're gonna fix them so that you can still be loved by God. It's told like his 2 weeks at Love and Action, and then also his life sort of leading, not life, but like the queer moments leading up to Love and Action. So let me just say, faith obviously still plays a huge role. And I think one of the things I actually really so I don't rate memoirs. I think it's really hard to rate memoirs because like there's just so much stuff, and how can you rate someone's life experience, right? But one of the things I like about the way he tells his story is how much he doesn't condemn anyone. He doesn't say anyone is bad. Like even the main factors in his time at Love and Action, he doesn't ever really say like this is a bad guy. So I really like appreciate that, and I like that about like the storytelling. But it's just, man, this one was it was hard to read because there's a huge sense of shame and wrongness and real honesty that's just like heavy. It's heavy to read. And what I really like too is he doesn't shy away from making anyone feel uncomfortable. And I found this with the other memoir as well. But they're both like, this is what happened to me, and this is how I felt at the time, and they're not trying to make it digestible. I don't know. This one, oh, man, you just get a huge sense of like, he grew up Baptist, which is, the way I understood it, is that it's a very literal interpretation of the Bible. And so like, it seems that in his work that he still believes in God, and he still maybe would say he was a religious person, but it's just not as literal anymore. But what they find a lot is just, God, this like literal sense of like, you will be in hell if you do this, and there's just such self-hate for this thing, and for things that you really, Conley can't be blamed for. And it's just I don't know, it was really, really powerful and really hard to read, and like super, and it just, so, I don't know, I would really recommend it, but of course, it's hard to read, and it might hit even harder for someone who grew up in a church, which I did not. But if you grew up in a church and woo, you know what I mean? Like, growing up in Western civilization, there's a little bit of the, like, anything but cisgender, heteronormative anything is just not right. So there's a little bit of that, but this is just at a whole nother level, and it was really interesting and really, really hard to read and really well written, I think, and just, whew. Then, because episode 7 is just the episode of memoirs, we also have We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib. Canadian, amazing, represent. She's from Pakistan, she's a Muslim, she grows up Muslim, of course, moves to Canada, and then has to kind of figure out who she is. She's like the oldest daughter, and when they move to Canada, she's entered into this arranged marriage with her cousin, fun, but she also has a huge amount of trauma from her childhood, and then she's in Canada, and she goes to college, and she begins to meet people who are queer identifying, and she sort of begins to discover who she is, but she's sort of trapped in this relationship. And it was really interesting to read, really good, very like, of course, heavy emphasis on the queer Muslim aspect, and sort of, again, that's what the We Have Always Been Here is about, right? Sorry, I'm losing a little bit of steam. This one was really good. It's just about discovering yourself and coming from, kind of, and like Boy Erased, coming from a place where yourself is not necessarily celebrated, and trying to have to break out of what you know. I don't know. I really like the way that Samra Habib writes. She writes of when she was a child, but not like she's trying to be a child, if that makes sense. And I really like that. And then again, just like Gerard Conley, her honesty and frankness and openness and was just really impressive to me. I guess also, I will say, one of the big messages that I took away, one of the big takeaways from this book was it takes a long time to figure out who you are, and that everyone identifies differently. And I think that was important. And I should have done that for the rest of the books, but I didn't. So, good. This one was good. Would recommend. I mean, I'd recommend basically all of these books. So now we're on to episode 8, the last episode, the final episode. So, kind of, spoiler alert, kind of, but again, we kind of knew this about Isaac. Isaac is figuring out his sexuality, right? Aren't we all? And he sort of seems like, I guess this isn't confirmed, so maybe it's not a spoiler, but he kind of begins to settle on the asexual identity. He reads the book. One of the books that he picks up is Ace by Angela Chen, and I think it's just kind of like a lay down on asexuality. And I have that ordered from the bookstore, but it hasn't come in yet, and it's been like a week since I ordered it, so I'm a little disappointed. It's been more than a week, actually. It's been like a week and a half. Anyway, so I'm going to read it. I think I sort of knew it would probably destroy me emotionally because of all the self-reflection that I'd have to do. And it was like, it's an info book, right? It's not a novel or a memoir. So I sort of was like, I'm not going to read that. So that's the second book that I didn't read, is Ace by Angela Chen. I think that it is probably going to be a valuable resource to figuring out identity, and definitely for Isaac. But yeah, I did not read this one. So the other book that he reads in episode 8 is Summer Bird Blue by Akemi Bowman. So this follows Rumi, whose sister just died in a car crash and is so grieving. She's grieving so much. Her whole life was her sister. Her sister was her best friend, and she just wanted to make music with her sister, and now her sister is not here. So her aunt takes her from her home in Washington with her mom to Hawaii. So Rumi is living with her aunt in Hawaii and is like, I don't know what I'm doing here. She doesn't know anything. She's very, very deeply entrenched in her grief, and she begins to make her way out of it with the help of her neighbors, a young man named Kai, surfer dude, they banter, and then an older man, Mr. Watanabe, who listens to music and is also going through his own grief. This book, I don't know. I was not interested in reading it, and then I read it, and I enjoyed it. I didn't dislike it. I think it was very, 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 grief was very strong, and depression, and I was like, yeah, I get some of this really hard. But of course, my younger sister, spoiler alert, has not died. I don't actually have a younger sister, so she really hasn't died. So there's like certain aspects that I can't relate to that were very important. Kind of same with We Are Okay by LaCour, is like the grandfather. This was, the support system in your life dying is just not something that I've ever experienced. Hopefully won't for a long time, but it's a huge part, of course, of these characters' lives. And so it was interesting. It's interesting to read, and it's interesting to see how differently different books do this. In Summer Bird Blue, it's just, there's a lot of grief, and there's a lot of also trying to figure out kind of who you are apart from someone else. Rumi is discovering her own identity. She's discovering who she is without Leah, and that was good. It also, a little bit, hints at asexuality, and I think that is on purpose because, I think that this book on purpose does that because, Isaac's struggling a little bit with his asexuality and starting to read about asexual characters living, normal lives. Of course, this is an abnormal situation in a normal girl's life, but this one was sad and touching and very full of grief. I will say, I have one more... Oh gosh, all my books just fell over. I have one more book to talk about, but before I do, because these are all the books, of course, that Isaac reads, minus Les Mis, which just don't even talk about it, and then the asexuality book. I think, one of the key themes, first of all, we have a lot of YA in here, which, makes sense. That's what we're experiencing. They're in high school. But I think a lot of the main themes in these books are loneliness, which to me makes a lot of sense for the kind of asexuality theme in Isaac's life. A profound feeling of loneliness. And when he freaks out after seeing James in a bookstore, that little, it's not even a speech. It's just he says a couple sentences to his friend group, and I'm just yes, go off, Isaac, amazing. So loneliness and trying to figure out who you are on your own, but also figuring out who you are with other people and how you relate to other people. And there's a lot of grief and a lot of just romance and identity. A lot of questions of identity in these books, which all books are like that, I guess, but it's just, I don't know. This stack of books has made me think a lot about my identity, and I'm so glad that I read these. Thanks, guys. I don't know who picked out the books, that Isaac should read, but I just want to say thank you for making me read all these books. I had read maybe 5 of them, and I'm so glad that I read the rest of them. They're is not one book. There's one book that I regret reading, and it was Around the World in 80 Days, just because I didn't end up caring. It was fun, but it was fine. But there's not another book on this list that I regret. There's not a book on this regret. Whoa, words. There's not a book on this list that I regret reading. Like, they were both fun and challenging and interesting. Some were a lot harder to read than others, and I just felt like this was a great collection of books. Really, 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 really enjoyed. I'm glad I did this again. I feel like I get to know Isaac on a deeper level. Like, you get to know these people on deeper levels, and also it made me feel I don't feel as weird for reading as much, because Isaac brings a book with him everywhere he goes too. And that felt great, because then I can be like, wow, I'm not that weird. So, I also read, and if you watched the season, you know, this book is hinted at a lot. It's not ever explicitly read, but it is hinted at, and that is Loveless by Alice Oseman, creator of the show, the queen herself. Loveless, if you do not know, follows Georgia War. Georgia, there on the cover. Georgia has never kissed a boy. She's never had sex. She's 18, and she's going away to college, and when she gets to college, she says, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I am going to experience this love that I have been told I'm going to experience my entire life. Everyone expects me to experience. I'm going to finally do it. She gets there, and she enlists the help of her roommate, Rooney, and her best friends, Pip and Jason, are also there. And with Rooney's help, she tries to, she wants to find people that she can date and fall in love with and kiss. But as the story progresses, she sort of begins to realize she might not want that at all. And so that's a huge theme. And that is, this is, of course, about discovering identity. And in relation to Isaac, it's about discovering, if maybe there's just a lack of attraction, period. Especially being having all this romance shoved down your throat your entire life. So that is a huge theme. And then there's also, of course, the theme of Georgia's, friends. She makes a couple mistakes, and she has to fight for her friends, and it's about love, right? It's about the love she has for her friends, and it's about loneliness and discovering who you are with your friends, and discovering who you are without your friends, and discovering how love can look to someone who doesn't necessarily feel the sexual attraction or the romantic attraction, and how your friends are just as important, if not more important, than the people that you date. It's also about Shakespeare a little bit, so that's fun. I just this one, I read it, I read it this morning. I read most of it this morning anyway. Every time I read it, which I've only read it twice, to be fair, but this one is the hardest book. It's, for me, for Alice Oseman, because Georgia deals with so much confusion and self-hate and, questions of, am I wrong for feeling this way? And it's so relatable, and really, it's really hard to read. It's because I'm just sitting there wow, am I Georgia, or am I Georgia? So anyway, yeah, I wanted to include this book, which I think is, aside from Radio Silence, is one of my favorite Alice Oseman books. I wanted to include this book, to read this book, because first of all, I didn't read Ace by Angela Chen, but I thought that this was, hinted at, and it's an Alice Oseman book. And it's also just, I think a lot of Isaac's storyline is sort of borrowed from this book. And I don't know. Anyway, those are all the books that I read for Isaac Heartstopper Season 2. Again, really grateful for, it's not really an opportunity. I didn't get the opportunity to read these books, but I got the opportunity. I got a list curated for me to read. And I loved it, and it's great. So, yeah. I hope that this was not that hard to follow. I don't know. I have a hard time following my own thoughts, and so hopefully, I made some sense, and hopefully, too, you picked out a book from here that you thought would interest you and you would read, because, if Isaac read it, you can read it. If I read it, you can read it. There's, again, 15 amazing books to choose from, and 2 books that you could read, 15 amazing books to choose from, and just, all these stories that, God, I don't know, I just love books so much. I love reading so much. I love Isaac so much. I am Isaac, and I just love Heartstopper so much. It makes me so happy, and it makes me just want what they have. Okay, so, yes, those are all the books that Isaac reads in Heartstopper Season 2. Thank you so much for watching this video. It's quite long. I'm sorry. I hope, you know, again, one of the 15 books I talked about was something for you, and I hope that you find a love like the love that Isaac has for all of his friends and the love that they have for him. That's just one of the best things, and I hope you have that and that you find that, and, you know, yeah. Okay, thanks for watching. I love you. Have a great day. Okay.